Hello, my name is Chuck Wolfe. Over the years, I've worked in many different roles, including leading my own leadership consulting company since 1994. I've worked for and with some of the best companies and universities in the world, and have had the opportunity to work with government officials, military organizations, and public and private schools. I'm a leading expert and pioneer in emotional intelligence. Since 2009, I've been a volunteer hosting a radio show I created called The Emotion Roadmap: Take the Wheel and Control How You Feel. I really enjoy making a difference in people's lives. The show is on award-winning community radio station WPKN in Bridgeport, Connecticut. In recent years, Simsbury Community Television has been sharing my shows on their station and on YouTube. My sincere hope is that everyone who watches regularly will learn how to use the Emotion Roadmap in their own lives by listening to people who call in to get help with challenges at work, home, and in communities. To learn more, go to www.emotionroadmap.com. If you have a comment or question, email me at cjwolfe@cjwolfe.com. Thank you and enjoy the show. Hello, you're listening to the Emotion Roadmap: Take the Wheel and Control How You Feel, and I'm Chuck Wolfe. Today's show is a recorded show designed to provide some of the highlights of what this show brings to people and to provide wishes for a happy holiday season for everyone. Today, I'd like to talk about the Emotion Roadmap. The Emotion Roadmap was designed after working closely with Yale President Peter Salovey and his colleagues, who helped to define emotional intelligence in 1990 when they published an article describing an ability-based model of emotional intelligence that suggests to all of us that we have abilities to perceive or identify emotions, to use emotions, to understand emotions, and to manage emotions. They describe these as actual abilities. And the important distinction they made is that we differ in these abilities. So some of us may be, for example, highly skilled in identifying emotions in ourselves and others. Some of us may think we're highly skilled in identifying emotions in ourselves and others, and yet may not be. And most of us are somewhat skilled in this area. And that's true about using emotions, understanding emotions, and managing emotions. In the late 1990s, one of Peter's colleagues, David Caruso, asked me to come join Peter Salovey, Jack Mayer, and himself to talk about how we might make this knowledge of an emotional intelligence different than analytic intelligence or cognitive intelligence, how we might make it useful to people. I'm known as having an ability to take theoretical models and make them practical. And so as I began to listen and understand and work with these gentlemen, these scholars, these psychologists, I discovered some information that was new to me. Even though I'd been in the field of psychology and leadership development and been a family therapist and a counselor over the years, I also learned much about emotions that I didn't know. At least a couple of key things that I'll share with you in this presentation today. So first, I'd like to share with you the Emotion Roadmap. This is what came from working with the other people in trying to find a way to make what I was learning practical. Now, I'm going to share with you 4 questions that are fairly simple in terms of the way they may sound, and yet they have a profound impact. Some people have found what I do with them when I teach them this roadmap to be life-changing. I hope for you, perhaps, you find it perhaps life-changing, but at least very useful. So the first question starts with, in a situation where you may have a difficult time choosing, making a decision, approaching a situation because you have some concern about the emotions involved. And this is what I found, is that really smart people, really anybody, But smart people are stuck often, unable to solve a problem despite having excellent problem-solving skills, when in fact, what's happening is that they are confounded by internal struggles having to do with their own emotions, or they're concerned with the emotions of someone else that they're dealing with. That's key to whatever situation they find themselves in. So again, the first question starts with, just let me understand a bit about the context, understand who's key to your concerns that you're sharing with me when you call me, or I have you as a client, or we just may be talking and I'm trying to be helpful. I'll ask the question, can you give me a short summary of what's going on? And then after I hear your summary, I ask you about how are you feeling? And how is anyone that might be key feeling? That's how it starts. Then I ask, how would you like them to feel? What would be ideal to feel for you and for anyone that's key? Now, the reason I ask what's ideal to feel has to do with the science of emotions, something I learned from Peter, Jack, and David. What they were discussing with me that I found so intriguing was that certain emotions are far better suited to particular tasks or goals than other emotions. Now, there's no handbook that says, if this happens to be what you're trying to do, here's the exact correct emotion you want to feel, because that's what works best. So while there isn't a guide per se that directs you to any kind of resource that you can find that tells you exactly what you want to feel, I think it's useful to share an example so you understand the conception that I found so powerful. For example, when you are in a situation where you have a presentation to make, one that will be very important to you, your career perhaps, to your company, to your situation, to your family. In other words, it has high stakes involved in it, and you're feeling very anxious, most of you would recognize that that's not a helpful feeling. Might be a very real feeling, might be very useful to know you're feeling anxious. I'm sure it is. But when you actually make the presentation, you're going to want to feel something quite different than anxious. Two key feelings come to mind that most of us would want to feel. Those are, I want to feel competent. I want to feel confident. I may want to feel inspirational if it's a motivational speech I'm making. So these are sort of a simple way. These feelings are a simple way of understanding why certain feelings might be better than other feelings in a particular situation. One of the things that the authors of this informational study that produced this emotional intelligence ability model suggested was that whatever we feel at any point in time is influencing what we think, what we say to ourselves, our thoughts, and our behaviors. And that's a very important distinction for understanding what I've learned and how I'm helping people. So the first question, again, starts with, what is it the person that I'm talking to is feeling? And anyone that's key, what does that person think he, she, or they are feeling? And then, as I mentioned a moment ago, next is, what would be ideal to feel? And what is ideal is based on what you think would be the best feeling for making sure that whatever decision you make, however you approach a conflict, is going to work out as best it can. Or if it's something internal, like I mentioned, you might feel anxious and want to feel confident, that somehow you can get from anxious to confident. So the first question, how is it you're feeling? How do you want to feel? What would be ideal to feel? Let's say it's just an internal situation, not dealing with someone else. And I've suggested to you that if you're feeling anxious and you want to feel confident, the next branch of their model is understanding emotions. How do you get from anxious to confident? How do you do that? Well, partly it starts with understanding how emotions work. Another thing I learned from Peter, Jack, and David is that emotions follow certain rules. What I added to what I learned from them is what I've learned myself over the years, which is that people aren't all the same. So while emotions might follow certain rules, what I have found is what might make one person angry may not be a big concern to someone else. What might make some person happy may not make another person happy. So while emotions follow certain rules, and that's the science end of it, there's also the art to understand who it is I'm dealing with. If I'm dealing with myself and I want to change how I feel, that might be different than dealing with my partner, my wife, or my children, or my colleagues, or my clients. So as you think about that, recognize that the first three questions are all about what's happening. So first, how are you feeling? Then asking yourself, what would be ideal to feel? Then suggesting ways that you might get from what you are feeling to what would be ideal to feel. And the last branch of their model is managing. So if you want to change from feeling anxious to confident, what might you do? The roadmap suggests that you consider things that would work for moving you from feeling anxious to confident. I'll ask you, if I'm working with you, have you ever felt anxious before and turned it into confidence? May have been in totally different circumstances, but the feelings were the same. Now, if that's the case, how does that happen? Well, you might recall a time in your life where you felt anxious. Often people do, by the way, and you were able to turn it into confidence. At which point I'll ask you, is there anything that you might learn from that prior experience? Again, recognizing totally different circumstances, but similar feelings. And often, interestingly enough, I find that when I ask that question, people begin to recognize, number one, that they felt this anxious before and were successful in generating confidence and having a useful and successful outcome. Then I ask if you can learn something from your prior experience and add it to what might work here, what would it be? And then people tell me what it is that they did before and why they think it might lend itself to being helpful in the present. At which point, if I like what they said and I think I can help them build on it, we construct a strategy. And then we ask in the managing part of the roadmap, okay, we've got several ideas about how you might move from anxious to confident. Let's talk about if you're willing to do each of them and if you're able to do each of them. Now, interestingly enough, in another time when I'm talking with you, I will explain to you why it's so hard sometimes, even though you might be able to do something successfully, your attitude might not allow you to. And that happens more often than you might think. But let's assume that you do have something that suggests in your own mind that you absolutely are capable and you're very willing. Now you have an emotion plan for accomplishing what you set out to do, which is to move yourself from feeling anxious to confident. Often something like that involves practice, dress rehearsals, talking to people who might be helpful in gaining the confidence you need by understanding more about your audience, for instance. Lots of ways that might work here. But the point is, it's a template for guiding you in moving from where you are feeling. And again, feelings are always informative, but they're not always helpful, to more helpful, more ideal feelings. It's really remarkable, I found, in working through this process, that when smart people are stuck and it's something emotional, by focusing specifically on the emotions in play, new options appear almost magically. That's how it feels. So one of the things I want to do quickly is then to introduce to you a conversation I had around holiday planning. This happens to be one of my first callers talking about something to do with seasonality and holidays. And since the holidays are upon us, I thought this would be a good one to share. The idea for Jim when he called me was that he has a new partner. He'd been divorced from his previous wife, and his two adult children, young adult, his daughter was in her late teens, his son, early 20s. And the two of them were coming to meet his new partner for the first time. And Jim had been listening to me discuss win-win scenarios, how to manage conflict, and he wanted to be proactive about when bringing them together. What should he be thinking about doing? How did he want each of them to feel, and how could he create the feelings he wanted? So it's a really kind of fun discussion, I think, and a very meaningful one for Jim. And actually, Jim called me back later to tell me that what we talked about and what we did actually worked quite well for him. So knowing that, you'll know that the conversation worked out. But you'll also hear as I walk through this with him, I'm doing this on my radio show, and you'll hear me make one or two mistakes, but what I'm constantly focused on is how is Jim feeling, who's involved, who are the people that are key, and how is he going to plan successfully for each of them to feel the ideal feelings he wants them to feel. So next, I'm going to play that conversation for you. Following that, I want to play a conversation that Peter Salovey, again, Yale president, Jack Mayer, who is a professor of psychology at the University of New Hampshire, and David Caruso, who is a consultant and also works at Yale, had with me, because the four of us together were instrumental in making the emotion roadmap come alive. It was my innovation that became what became so successful and became the focus for my radio show, the Emotion Roadmap, Take the Wheel and Control How You Feel, and for a lot of the client work I've done since the 1990s that has helped in many cases actually change people's lives in a very positive, meaningful way. After I play that conversation with Peter, Jack, and David and I talking about the origins of emotional intelligence, so you'll learn a little bit about the history and also about the development of the Emotion Roadmap. And finally, I want to play a conversation with someone that I really, really respect as a leader, talking about emotions and emotional intelligence in the workplace. So at this point, I'm going to play the conversation with a Jim who calls to get some help with Christmas and holiday planning.
I have a seasonal situation to describe to you. I try to keep it simple. I have children coming to spend the holiday with me, grown children, and a brother and sister, and it's a wonderful thing. I'm looking forward to it and want to be accommodating. At the same time, I have a new partner in my life who happens to be single, and she's also just been through a personal tragedy. So it's really important to me that she feel welcome and that she feel comfort within the group, but having a little bit of a conflict in trying to tend to different people's needs, as well as my own.
Here's how the roadmap works. How many adult children are we talking about?
Two.
Are they coming with others or just the two of them?
Basically others. Basically just the two of them, yes.
Just the two of them. And are they a brother and sister, two brothers, two sisters?
Brother and sister, yes. She's 18, so she's a little a work in progress, I like to say, and he's 25, and he's world weary. So
okay. Well, Jim, just my own thought is I think we're all a work in progress. So, but I would like to focus on each of them individually and help you to think that through in this way. The idea of emotional roadmap, I think you're really smart to call, because what you want to do is plan emotionally how you want them all to feel. So, I mean, let's just quickly assume you want to feel confident, you got a game plan that's working, that's why you're calling.
Yes, that's right.
Okay, and you're a bit anxious about it because you're not sure you got a game plan that's going to work, and there's probably some tension. New partner, she wants to get along, she's a little nervous, don't know how the kids are going to see her.
All true.
Right? Mm-hmm. And the two kids coming in are like, okay, I'm glad to see Dad, but I'm not really sure about this other person.
You got it.
Okay, and one of them who's kind of the son is probably, sounds like you might be able to talk with him about it ahead of time, a bit easier than maybe your daughter, although you might want to consider doing both. But the key thing is you want them to feel accepting.
Correct.
At the same time, I think they need to feel very special. That it's about them visiting you and their time with you, right?
That's so important, yes.
Right. So if that's how you want everybody to feel, then you want to ask yourself, okay, I need a game plan that helps me to think through how to make them feel very special. Something that you do for them individually when they walk in the door. I don't know what it might be. Something that a little gift for them.
Yeah.
That says, I'm thinking about you, and it's something that you know that they would value, and I'm so thankful you're here, and that and that you spend time with them. You know, you introduce them, of course, to this new person, but you explain to your new partner that I think, well, I want you to feel accepted, and I know that you want to feel that too, and I think the best way I can do that is to have the focus to be on my children, and I'll include you, but I'm going to be really focused on the two of them for the first hour or two, and and I'm not ignoring you, but I think that's the way to bridge this gap, and would you be supportive of that?
So put it in her place, and
so she doesn't feel ignored, because I think in the beginning, for the two children want to know you're still their dad, you still care most about them, and this new person may or may not be a partner forever. Because nothing's forever in their mind, because they know that it wasn't forever with their parents.
Correct.
But they'll be much more accepting, I think, Jim, if you are focused on them. And occasionally she may want to, if she feels the time is right, ask something about them. And when that feels like it's been exhausted, then turn to her and say, I'd like to tell you a little bit about, and then ask her to talk a little bit and see if you can bring the kids out and even think ahead of time about things that the kids might like to know more about, that might relate to your daughter, that might relate to your son, things that they may have in common.
So drawing them out a little bit.
Yeah. So that when your partner talks about herself, she talks about the things that they're most likely to respond to.
I see. Yeah. It's plausible what you're describing, and I also, I wonder about the gender conflicts. I wonder if I should be hyper aware of my daughter and this other woman in my life. I'm fixating a bit on that, and I wonder if that's necessary or.
Well, I think if assuming your partner's okay with this, if the focus is exclusively on your daughter for the first 30 minutes, not that you're not talking to your son too, but I mean that she really feels incredibly special, she'll relax a bit. And the thing that I think you want to think about too, Jim, is not to have like super expectations that everybody's going to live in harmony going forward from this first time together.
I see, yeah.
But that you're making a step forward, that you're building on some progress. And that I think the thing that will make the day for everyone is you're not being panicked and being too anxious. The thing that you want to manage inside yourself, Jim, is your ability to be sincere and caring deeply about everybody in the room, and then they'll forgive any mistakes you make.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Your authenticity, your genuineness, your caring, and your love for all three of them in the room, that's what's got to be on display the entire time you're together. And when you're done, you can second guess yourself, but don't do it while you're with them. Yeah,
this really makes sense, and I'm actually taping your advice. I'm going to listen to it again and reconsider it. I think that you're making sense. Now, according to your categories you described earlier in the show, would you consider this a compromise?
No. What I just try to help you do is everybody wins here.
True.
Everybody wins, because your daughter's the most needy in this probably, and she's going to be the focal point for however long it takes. Your son's probably going to get that. I mean, to the extent that you have this relationship with your son, I'd give him a call and tell him, hey, this is my game plan for what do you think?
Your comments are right on. I really appreciate your insight, and I'm gonna ponder this and move forward with it.
That's great. Well, Jim, thanks for the phone call, and I guess I'm going to move on now and take Jeremy's. And best of luck with it, and you give us a call back and let us know how it works.
Thanks so much. Happy holidays to you.
You too.
So you had a chance to listen to Jim, and you heard me work through the different people in the family. You heard me try to understand who were the key people, and it was all three of them. Over the time we were talking, we decided that it made some sense to try and focus on his daughter, but to explain to his partner that she would not be the focal point in the beginning, and that he felt this was the best strategy to help her feel accepted, which I suspect the partner felt good about. again, Jim called me later and said that the meeting went pretty well based on what we had talked about. And we also suggested that he talk with his son. And his son also, I guess, when he talked with him, Jim let me know that his son was appreciative of being that dad called him and said, how are we going to make this work? I really want you, but also your sister to feel really accepted here, and my partner too. And I know it's a bit of a struggle for you too, but I'd like your help with this. What do you think? So that was an important consideration. But again, it followed this flow. How are you feeling? How do you think each one of them that's key is feeling? How do you want each of them to feel? What is it we're likely and able to do that would make them feel the way that you want? And what are you absolutely willing and able to do? So identify feelings, use of feelings. What feelings do you want people to feel? What's ideal to feel? Understand feelings, understand what's going to make them feel the way you want, and what are you willing and able to do? And Jim, to his credit, he was taking notes and he was taping the show and he went forward with that. So that's a pretty good example, I think, of how the emotion roadmap works in a family setting, in a personal way. And in later volumes, I'll do more around the workplace. But I want to do something a little later in the workplace as well. But next, I'd like to share with you a conversation that I had with Peter Salovey, Jack Mayer, and David Crusoe. At the time I had the conversation, Peter was not president of Yale. He was provost. Peter, in the time that I've known him, got promoted from the department chair of psychology all the way up to the president through several different promotions in Yale University. Pretty remarkable in and of itself. So you're going to hear from Peter, Jack, and David. And the description, not the full description, the other program was quite long, but this is about an excerpt of them talking about sort of the history of emotional intelligence and their understanding and appreciation for what I conceived of the emotion roadmap.
If you could give us a little bit of history, Peter, I'd appreciate it.
Sure, Chuck, be happy to. I think it came out of work that both Jack and I were doing in the 1980s concerning the relationship between moods and emotions on the one hand, and cognitive activities like attention and memory on the other. And in different ways, both Jack and I were working on this question of how are cognitive activities affected by emotion. How does the arousal of an emotion change what people pay attention to, change what they can remember, change how they make a decision? And I think we were noticing many different phenomena in conducting those experiments. One, that people differed. For example, at the end of an experiment where you put people in a mood and tested their memory, and then talked to them about what they thought the experiment was about, some people were very aware. Well, it seemed like you were trying to manipulate my mood. Others had no idea what had just happened. And if you asked them, well, if you thought we were manipulating your mood, what did you think the effect was? Some of them were very insightful. Others of them weren't. And so Jack and I were sharing many of these sort of experiences with participants in our experiments. And that summer found ourselves at a conference in a beautiful beach town in North Carolina, and began to talk about, well, maybe there are a set of skills or competencies around which individuals differ that have to do with identifying your emotions, understanding them, managing them, and using them in cognitive processes. And we wrote, what came out of those conversations was a paper that we wrote together where we titled it, and we titled that paper Emotional Intelligence. And after some false starts in trying to get it published, we did publish it. And I wouldn't say that the idea caught on like wildfire. It really didn't at first. But several years later, when a more popular book by Dan Goleman came out that talked about our work on emotional intelligence, and of course described its potential implications for education and the workplace, and tied in the very interesting neuroscience research that was happening at the same time. Suddenly there was a lot more popular interest in the topic, and that period in the in the 90s when all that happened was a very exciting one for us. But I think we were thrilled that people found the concept compelling, that it helped organize a set of skills that hadn't been looked at in an organized way previously, or at least not often. What lay before us, of course, was, all right, if that's the case, how would you measure it, and what would it predict if you did measure it? But that all came later.
Jack, would you care to add to the story about how you and Peter first got started with this?
Well, I think Peter's description is a really great description of what happened. I can add in a little bit, maybe from one other angle. The area that we were working in was called technically cognition and affect, and it was the idea of how, as Peter described, how thoughts change in relation to emotions. And one of the aspects of that was, as Peter said, we noticed some people were very sensitive as to the relationship between their emotions and their thoughts, and others seem to have challenges in describing anything around their emotional shifts. And another line of research at the time that we were fairly cognizant of was what I'll refer to as the search for the elusive third intelligence. And in clinical psychology at the time, the most widely used scale of intelligence was the Wechsler Adult Intelligence Scale in its revised edition at that time. And it measured two intelligences, a verbal intelligence and perceptual organizational intelligence. And there had been a lot of speculation in the intelligence community, starting really with Wechsler's work, that there was a missing third intelligence is sort of the way it was viewed. Maybe that was a bit naive back then, but that was the general idea, that maybe in addition to verbal intelligence and this sort of perceptual or organizational or what was then called performance intelligence, that maybe there was some kind of a social intelligence as well. Well, the problem was that when people had tried to measure social intelligence, they couldn't distinguish it either from verbal or from performance intelligence. And as we developed this work and we're thinking about these people who are more aware and able to think about their emotions and recognize their emotions and so on, we thought, well, maybe social is too close to verbal because it uses a lot of language, and too close to perceptual organizational because you perceive and organize social relations and so forth. But maybe emotion is just enough different. So it is the third, that elusive third intelligence. And so that was very much on our minds, and that's where the intelligence part came in as well.
Now, in fairness, other thinkers, particularly in psychology, had insights along these lines. And perhaps the most relevant one is Howard Gardner up at Harvard, who in the 1980s really popularized the notion of multiple intelligences. I think in his first book he argued for 7 kinds of intelligences. And one of them had to do with what he called intrapersonal intelligence, which included, understanding your feelings and making judgments on the basis of them. And so this idea, we like to think that our 1990 paper brought all of this together, but I don't think we want to claim that no one was having relevant thoughts along these lines at the time. It was very much in the air.
There also seemed to be kind of a very visceral reaction to it by some psychologists who are just struggling with the idea of a third intelligence. And it seems like over time, though, you've answered some of their questions.
I think one of the big, questions in psychology was the one of measurement. If you're proposing that there is more than the traditional two kinds of intelligence, verbal and performance, as Jack mentioned, you better prove it. That is, show that you can measure it, show that it is distinguishable once you measure it from traditional intelligence, and then show that it matters, show that it predicts something.
I think.
Well, it turned out that challenge was a more complicated one, perhaps than anyone thought. It took many years to develop a way of measuring emotional intelligence as a set of abilities, as a set of skills, reliably, meaning that you would get the same scores if you measured a person now and a week from now and a month from now. And then you had those studies had to be done to show that if you measure their traditional intelligence, if you measure aspects of their personality, and if you measure emotional intelligence, that emotional intelligence still matters. I think we are now at a point where there's a body of research supporting all of that. But, in 1995, 1996, 1997, that didn't exist. And some were quite skeptical that it would ever be possible to generate that body of knowledge. But a lot of hard work from many different people, including yourself, Chuck, I think helped establish the concept as a valid one.
Thank you.
Yeah, Chuck, I think these are excellent tools. I think the roadmap is a great way to help people organize their thinking around emotional intelligence. And I think these essentially questions that you ask folks to ponder are nice ways to help people develop these skills. We haven't talked about it very much in the hour so far, but people. One of the reasons I think people like this concept is because they can imagine there must be ways that they can get better on this set of competencies over time. And I think you're describing the kind of interactions that help people get better. Well, Chuck, we really appreciate the opportunity to talk about emotional intelligence with you today. And I do recommend Jack's website for listeners who want to follow up. There's a lot of resources there. Again, it's www.unh.edu/emotional_intelligence. And there's a lot there, and we welcome people actually reading, especially some of the original papers in this area to get a better sense of what the research basis is for this idea. We appreciate the chance to talk about it today with you.
Thanks so much for being on the air, Peter.
Thank you.
And thank you all. Thank you for having us. I want to express my thanks as well and say, the kind of applied conversations that you have with people are very informative to us as we design and think about new tests in the area. For example, the split that you described between high managers or high self-managers and low other managers, and vice versa, are splits that we don't necessarily think about when we're writing that test. And it's very, very interesting to me to hear the kinds of real-life conversations that you're having with people on the front lines of thinking about their feelings and how those feelings can assist them in their lives going forward. So
and Chuck, was great to talk to you again. Thank you for helping me, sending me down the road with the roadmap and helping to apply the scientific model in a workable, understandable language for clients out there. So I appreciate that collaboration, and I'll look to it in the future as well. Thanks so much.
Thanks so much, everybody, and thank you all for listening to.
So you heard Peter Salovey at the beginning, and Jack Mayer, the two original authors of the study that got published in 1990. And you heard Jack and Peter talk about the role that the roadmap and the questions that I ask can actually help people get better. And that's an exciting concept that people have really benefited from. That's the excitement for me, why I'm sharing it today with all of you. And then you heard David Caruso as well talk about the work that we did collaboratively in helping all of them really to use this concept to help make their lives and others around them better. One of the things Jack mentioned is the distinction in one of the tools, in the tool that measures emotional intelligence. It's called the Mesquite. It actually stands for the Mayer Salovey Caruso Emotional Intelligence Test. And it measures the managing emotions, but it measures it in two very different ways. One is you manage your own personal feelings, your ability to manage internally what's going on inside of you. And it also measures how effectively you manage your relationships with others. And while you might get an overall branch score on managing emotions that is 100, as an example, 100 is, if you know anything about emotional intelligence or any kind of intelligence scores, 100 tends to be what they define as the top of a bell curve. In other words, most people that would take this test would fall, their scores would fall somewhere close to 100, sort of being an average of how people do. But what if, and this is what I explained to Jack and Peter, which I found on the test on occasion, somebody scored like 80 on managing emotions internally and 130 on managing emotional relationships with others. What it suggested to me and what I found when I'm coaching people seems to indicate, not always, but often, that somebody who is 130 on managing relationships with others is seen by others as extremely emotionally intelligent because that person works so hard to make sure everybody else feels okay. But when they're very low on the other side of the management question, in terms of managing what's happening to them internally, what I find somewhat often actually is that they're drowning internally. They're working so hard to make sure that everybody else is feeling the way they would like them to feel, but they're not taking care of themselves. It's a really interesting point. There's lots of points to share about the Mesquite itself, but you now have a little bit of history about the actual emotion roadmap and the origins of emotional intelligence. It started with Jack and Peter, and David joined them to help them to create that measurement that Peter said. In order to say you have discovered an intelligence, you have to measure it, and it has to be different than other existing measurements of other intelligence. It can't be too close. It has to be measuring something different. And also what Peter said is that those differences need to matter, and these do. Now, last, I'd like to share with you a conversation with one of the best leaders I know who's extremely emotionally intelligent. It's not something he actually had known about scientifically. He just behaves in certain ways that really fit with the categories of what makes for an emotionally intelligent leader. I'd like to play that for you. That'll be the last thing that we do in this volume. Now, the person we'll hear from, John Caparella, is an award-winning leader in the hospitality industry. He's had multiple positions. And this particular interview, when I was talking with him, he was the president of the Palazzo and Venetian hotels in Las Vegas, and also of the Sands Convention Center. So we'll be hearing from John.
You say, like many other leaders say, employees are our most valuable assets, but different than most other leaders I've ever met and worked with, you actually act on it. And I've seen things that you've done that no other leaders have done, which are about making sure, when I introduced that emotional intelligence research to you, that said that people at the kind of places that you've been working at in recent years want to feel welcome, comfortable, and important. And there's a lot more to that than just those words. But in order to make that happen, your approach has been, then our employees got to feel welcome, comfortable, and important, because that's who's going to make the customer interface work.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. As you just mentioned and opened today with, I absolutely believe that you will not get great customer service if you don't have highly motivated, engaged, satisfied team members, employees, and that comes first. You can't have breakthrough performance in an organization if you don't have great culture in an organization. So in the past, I've put together an employee guarantee that's very prominent, that's very well promoted, and gives the employee access to senior management if they feel the guarantee isn't in place. And it's as simple as saying you're going to be respected. You'll work in an organization that lives by its values, that you have an opportunity to voice your concerns at all times, and that you have an opportunity to grow and learn. I absolutely know that you must have engaged employees, respected employees, in order to have breakthrough customer service.
Well, John, I want to say thank you so much for being our guest today, and I hope you enjoyed it. It was really a valuable experience for us. And anything else you'd like to say in closing?
Just thank you for today, and really all your support over the years. As you've pointed out, we've worked together on many different initiatives, all to improve my skill set, my knowledge, my teams, and it's been very valuable, and I'm confident we will work together again. So thank you.
Well, thank you very much, John. You have a great day, and thanks so much for being our guest.
Okay, thanks.
So you heard from John Caparella, and this is, again, there's a lot more depth, and I'll play some other clips from John later, but I wanted you to hear a leader talking about the emotions that he felt his employees needed to feel in order to benefit customers. John has won a number of awards in his properties that he's led because of the customer satisfaction scores. Premium profits lie in people feeling strong loyalty to brands. And one of the things that happened in the hotel industry was that there was some research on emotional intelligence that said, as you heard me say in the beginning, welcome, comfortable, and important. That's what people want to feel when they come into a hotel property. Think of yourself entering any kind of hotel after a journey. You get to where you want to be, and you find the person at the front desk to be extremely welcoming. Or you find yourself in a line, and there's lots of people, and all of a sudden 2 or 3 or 4 more people appear at the front desk, and the line moves really fast. Or you're a business leader, and you've got something wrong in a meeting room where you are, and you have a access number that you call, and within seconds, whatever problem you experience is fixed. You want people to be really attentive to customers, and the way you do that is you are really attentive to the people who work for you. I remember introducing John to the research, and I was telling him that, look, there's some really interesting, intriguing research on what people need to feel. I mean, I think you know this intuitively, but here's some research to support what you've been saying for years. And when I brought it to his attention, he said, Chuck, this information is really excellent, but I don't want to start with the customer. We already do a lot to make sure our customers are satisfied. Really, where I want to start is I want to work with my training department and see by group. We'll bring, we had at that particular time when I worked with them, we were working with actually several thousand people, and we brought them together in groups. We brought the housekeepers together. We brought the front desk people together. Anyway, we brought all these different groups together, and we asked them, to what extent do you feel welcome, comfortable, and important? What are the things already that your organizations are doing to make you feel welcome, comfortable, and important? And what else could they be doing? And that information was presented to the senior leaders of each division and each team. And then when John gathered all his people together to discuss how people were feeling in their respective divisions, they continued to monitor that for a full year. And while people were feeling very good because John set that tone anyway, they continued to feel even better about being in that particular workplace. John was a master at that. He didn't just say the words, our people are our most important assets. He acted on it. So I hope today you found that the conversation around the emotion roadmap, the presentation by Jim on holiday planning, the actual background from Peter, Jack, and David, and then the conversation with John Caparello about workplace emotions and what you want people to feel in order to provide the best possible service to your customers. How do you do that? I hope you found it really informative and helpful. Thank you. So, as you've been listening and thinking about emotional intelligence and the emotion roadmap, what it means, how it works, what you can learn from it, I encourage you, as you think about the holidays coming up, how you're feeling about those holidays, and so forth, to think about how to be gracious, how to make your guests feel welcome, comfortable, and important. As you bring over people that you may have some fundamental disagreements with, about anything, really. Politics seems to be quite common these days, but it's not the only thing people have argued about over the years at family dinner tables when they're bringing family members together that haven't been together for quite some time. Think about all the things that you can do to make everyone in your family feel welcome, comfortable, and important. Perhaps it's important for you to consider some topics off limits at the whole table, but that when people want to sit down and just chat with one or two other people, anything's game, or whatever kind of norms that make some sense for having happy gatherings when people come together for the holidays. I'm struck at times by the love sometimes people have for one another, but yet they have an inability to communicate effectively because of some differences of opinion about many different things that seem to matter so much and get in the way of the feelings of love and caring we have for one another. So as you think about holiday time, the spirit of the holidays, the spirit of Christmas, the spirit of Hanukkah, other religious observances that you might have around this time of year, whatever it might be, whether it's spiritual and not related to any particular religion, but just some spirituality that comes into mind as you consider the holiday times when people gather together, do what you can to be kind, gracious, caring, warm, and loving to the people around your table. Do what you can to minimize conflict. If conflicts exist, see if you can be a mediator, someone that can help to resolve conflict, help people come together, recognize that, sure, there are places we are going to disagree. I like to joke sometimes, I don't even agree with myself all the time, so why would I expect to agree with you all the time? But if we can sort of lighten the mood, be a little jovial around the fact that, hey, we disagree, but you know what? The idea of disagreement is here forever. We're always going to have disagreements, but also lasting forever is our love for one another, our caring for one another, our giving and kindness to one another. So if I can help you to think that way around holiday time, I hope that that's something that you take to the dinner table and that you surround yourself with the people that you love and you act very loving to them for as long as you're together. And sometimes I know there's things we just can't help ourselves but saying. And if you say something and you know it's something you probably shouldn't have said, clean it up. Do your best to deal with it and make it right. Ask for forgiveness if that's what's required. Asking for forgiveness is different than simply saying, I'm sorry. Asking for forgiveness puts it on to the other person to ask them to forgive me. Saying I'm sorry is just my way of saying, I'm sorry I did that, but I didn't ask how you're feeling about it. Asking forgiveness is asking, what are you feeling about it, and is it possible for me to get this right? So I hope that's encouraging to all of you. I wish you a happy holiday season. And again, you've been listening to Chuck Wolfe. This is WPKN 89.5 FM. The Emotion Roadmap. Take the wheel. You take the wheel and control how you feel over the holiday season and all the time. I will talk with you live the following week in December. Bye-bye now.
Funding for Simsbury Community Television is provided in part by contributions from viewers like you. Thank you.